There's a lot of talk these days about the place of statues in the public arena that depict historical figures who acted in ways or held views which are abhorrent to any person of goodwill today. In some circles, this seems to have even moved to an extreme, seeking the destruction of any statue which glorifies any aspect of Western civilization. All statues aren't created equal, and perhaps the removal of some should be discussed in their individual context. But what general guidance can biblical tradition teach us about honoring people who have done dishonorable things or seeking to purge ourselves of ugly sides of history? People and nations are imperfect. The divine ideals that were set forth for humanity at Mount Sinai were not and are not always lived up to by the people on a personal or national level. A unique feature of the Hebrew Bible, and also an indicator of its authenticity, is how objective it is about the very people that accepted it. Typically, the story of a nation's history are biased, depicting its founders and past leaders in improbably glorious terms. Anything that could be viewed as even remotely critical or humiliating is usually left out or hidden or erased from the record. The Hebrew Bible, however, is replete with criticism of the ancient Israelites. They're constantly described as a stiff-necked, argumentative, stubborn people, a nation of whiners and doubters and rebels. Their recurring falls into barbarism, paganism, and moral degradation is openly recorded and reprimanded. Even the most prominent biblical leaders aren't exempt from having their mistakes and their shortcomings openly discussed. Abraham and Isaac both have rebellious and wicked children. Jacob steals his father's blessing from his brother Esau. Jacob's sons, the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel, wish to kill their brother Joseph and only concede to, we'll just sell him into slavery. Moses, the Hebrew Bible's most well-known figure, is not allowed to enter the promised land because of a sin. Aaron, the future high priest and brother of Moses, is associated with the construction of the golden calf. The illustrious King David, who the Messiah himself descends from, has an unseemly episode with Bathsheba. At the same time, all of these biblical figures are hailed as leaders, and we look to them with reverence. Additionally, the nation as a whole, despite their flaws, is constantly called the chosen nation, the apple of God's eye. Why would that be? Didn't they err? Didn't they sometimes engage in practices that the Hebrew Bible itself rejects and prohibits? If perfection were the measure of greatness, nobody in human history would ever be seen as great. However, the true measure of greatness on a personal level and a national level is growing and learning from our failures. It's the very confrontation with one's inner demons that's the source of one's greatness. It's clear that the biblical narrative is not a story of angelic humans creating and living in a perfect society, but instead a story of imperfect beings struggling with their own flaws to live up to divine ideals. In that light, the veneration of our forefathers and prophets is not primarily because of their perfection, but a recognition of how much they impacted the world through the spreading of these divine ideals. The Hebrew Bible is not a very big fan of statues. You know, that whole second commandment thing, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. But putting the graven image aspect aside, what's the biblical lesson for today's statue dilemma? Slavery was a reprehensible stain on our nation's history. George Washington did own slaves, as did his neighbors. Why are there no statues memorializing his slave-owning neighbors? Because the statue is not paying homage to his slaveholding. Instead, Washington statues commemorate his unique contributions to his country, leading patriot forces to victory in the nation's War of Independence and for serving as the country's first president. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves and had flaws of his own. Yet memorials to Jefferson are to highlight his legacy as spokesperson for democracy, an American founding father and president, and the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. America, like ancient Israel, was built on eternally good and true principles, springing primarily from the Judeo-Christian ethic. Paralleling some biblical figures, these American heroes had their flaws, yet they're not known for, defined by, and revered for these flaws, but for their contribution to society, fulfilling the promise and broadening the scope of the divine ideals upon which it was founded. The story of America is the story of grappling with human flaws and the gradual growing application of those principles to live up to them in practice. The key to achieving unity in these challenging times is by uniting, by unifying behind shared values. The shared values upon which this country was founded are inherently good, even though unfortunately it took many generations until these principles were actualized in the fullest sense to the entire population. Perhaps our emphasis should not be focused on destroying the past, but using the past as a reminder of our mistakes so that we can correct our future.